the silence before the storm. The sound of waves rolled softly against the Navy base as the evening sun threw golden light across the harbor. Sailors hurried about their duties, their boots striking firmly against the steel deck. It was a busy day. Yet there was something unusual in the air, as though everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. Among the officers gathered on the pier was one tall man in crisp uniform. His shoulders were squared, his face hard with pride, and his voice sharp as he gave commands. His reputation was known across the base, strict, often arrogant, and never forgiving of mistakes. He believed respect was something demanded, not earned. But standing a short distance away, leaning quietly against a railing, was someone who did not belong to this world of commands and orders, Keanu Reeves. He was not there to make a speech or to draw attention. He had come because he was invited by a group of sailors who admired his kindness and the way he lived with humility despite his fame. Keanu carried himself without the shield of celebrity. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, his hair falling naturally across his face and his eyes calm. He blended in with the ordinary workers around him, greeting them with soft nods, shaking hands, and asking about their families as though he had known them for years. Yet the silence broke when the officer noticed him. The officer stepped forward, boots striking louder now, the air tightening with each step. The crowd turned, sensing a clash about to unfold. The officer's voice cut across the dock. "What is a movie star doing here? This is not a place for actors seeking attention. This is the Navy. We work, we fight, we bleed. Not stand in front of cameras pretending." The words dropped like heavy stones echoing through the pier. Whispers followed. Some sailors looked away, ashamed, while others stared at Keanu, waiting to see how he would respond. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that makes hearts pound faster. Keanu did not move at once. His eyes remained steady on the officer, not in anger, not in defiance, but in calm patience. He could feel the heat of humiliation pressing against him. Yet his face did not show pride, nor did he let insult control him. Instead, he spoke in a voice so quiet that the crowd leaned closer to catch his words. "I did not come here for attention. I came here to listen, to understand, to respect what all of you give every day. I am not here to act. I am here to learn." The words carried more weight than a shout. The officer stiffened, his jaw clenching. He expected a defensive reply, maybe a sharp retort. Instead, he faced humility, something he could not easily fight. Still, the officer pressed harder, his tone sharper. "Men like us don't need sympathy from outsiders. Respect is earned here, not given by speeches from actors who play heroes on screen. You think listening is enough? You don't belong here." The tension in the air thickened. The younger sailors shifted uncomfortably. They admired Keanu, yet they feared the officer's wrath. No one dared to intervene. It was a battle not of fists, but of pride and humility. Keanu paused again. His silence was not weakness. It was strength. He knew the power of waiting, of not rushing into anger. Then, gently, he said, "I am not a hero. I have never claimed to be. But I have seen real heroes in places like this. I came to thank them, and if standing quietly here is an insult, then I will accept it. But I will still honor those who serve." The words struck deep. Some sailors lowered their heads, touched by his sincerity. Others stared at the officer, waiting for his reply. But before the officer could answer, another sound echoed across the pier, the sound of a car pulling up. Heads turned as the door opened and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Tom Cruise. He had come unannounced, wearing casual clothes but carrying the same strong presence that made people turn wherever he walked. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, catching the rigid stance of the officer, the quiet composure of Keanu, and the anxious faces of the sailors. Tom walked forward with measured steps, his face serious. "What's happening here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The officer saluted out of habit, though his pride still burned. "Sir, we are addressing a civilian who thinks he belongs here." Tom's eyes moved to Keanu, then back to the officer. His voice lowered, but each word carried weight. "Do you know what real strength is, officer? It is not in shouting, not in humiliating. It is in knowing when to respect those who come here with humility." Keanu did not come to pretend. He came to show gratitude. "And if you cannot see the difference, then you are blind to the meaning of service." The sailors froze. The officer's face tightened, anger battling with shame. But the balance had shifted. Tom's presence, his authority, and his defense of Keanu changed the air completely. Keanu, however, did not let the moment turn into triumph. He stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Tom's shoulder. "It's all right. Let us not turn this into anger. Respect cannot be forced. It must be chosen. I came here to listen, and I will keep listening, even to words that hurt, because listening is how we honor others." The pier was silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was not heavy with tension. It was heavy with reflection. The sailors stood taller, not because of fear, but because they felt something awaken inside them. Keanu had not fought insult with pride. He had faced it with humility, and in doing so, he exposed the weakness of arrogance without raising his voice. And though the officer still clenched his jaw, unable to answer, the truth of the moment was already clear to everyone who had witnessed it. This was not about an actor. This was about humanity, about respect, about kindness standing firm when tested by pride. The sun dipped lower into the horizon, its light scattering across the waves. The first chapter of this story was written not with fists, nor with shouting, but with the quiet strength of humility. The sailors would remember this moment long after the sound of the waves faded. And deep inside, even the officer felt something he did not want to admit: respect for the man he had tried to humiliate. When pride meets silence, the night had settled over the harbor, but the tension of the day still lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed the clash. The waves outside whispered quietly, yet inside the base, conversations carried weight. Sailors sat together in small groups, their voices low, replaying every word that had been spoken between the officer Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise. Some spoke with admiration. "Did you see the way Keanu stayed calm? I've never seen someone take insult like that and still show respect." Others shook their heads. "The officer won't let this go. He looked like he was burning inside. Tomorrow might be worse." In the silence of his quarters, Keanu sat alone, staring at the faint reflection of moonlight on the water. He had faced humiliation before in life, but something about this moment had pierced deeper. It was not only the insult, it was the reminder that humility often feels like weakness to those who do not understand it. Yet he knew what mattered. He was not there to prove strength through pride. He was there to show that kindness could stand against arrogance. There was a gentle knock on his door. When he opened it, a young sailor stood outside, his face nervous but respectful. "Sir," the sailor said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. What you said today, it reminded me why I serve. Respect is not just about orders. It is about humanity." Keanu smiled faintly, placing a hand on the sailor's shoulder. "You serve with more courage in a day than I will in a lifetime. Thank you for letting me be here." But not far away, in another room of the base, the officer sat stiffly at his desk. His fists clenched as he replayed the scene over and over. Every word from Keanu felt like a challenge. Every defense from Tom Cruise felt like an attack on his authority. His pride refused to let it rest. "An actor teaching me about respect?" he muttered under his breath. "I'll show them what real respect looks like." Morning came with the sharp blast of the bugle. Sailors lined up for drills, their boots striking the ground in unison. The officer stood at the front, his eyes harder than usual, his commands sharper. He was determined to remind everyone who held power here. But when he saw Keanu standing quietly near the edge of the formation, something inside him tightened. He barked, "Reeves, since you are so eager to learn respect, let us see what you are made of. Join the men in drill. Let us test your so-called humility." The sailors froze. Some looked at Keanu with worry. Others looked at the officer, shocked that he would demand this from a civilian. Keanu did not protest. He simply nodded and stepped forward, lining up with the sailors. The officer gave a cold smile. "Let's see if Hollywood humility survives. Navy steel." The drills began. Push-ups, sit-ups, long runs across the pier under the morning sun. Keanu followed without complaint. His breath grew heavy, his muscles ached, but he did not stop. He kept pace, sweat running down his face, his shirt damp, yet his expression calm. The sailors, though trained, could see his effort. They were surprised that he did not quit, that he did not argue. Some even slowed down to match his pace, silently showing their respect. The officer, however, grew more frustrated. He expected Keanu to collapse, to beg for mercy, to prove himself weak. Instead, Keanu's quiet determination only made the officer's anger rise. "Faster!" the officer shouted. "Harder! Show us you belong here!" Keanu stumbled once, his knees nearly giving way, but he pushed himself back up. He whispered under his breath, words only he could hear. "Humility is not weakness. Keep going." When the drills ended, the sailors collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Keanu sat among them, exhausted, but smiling faintly. One sailor turned to him and said, "Sir, you didn't have to do this, but you did. And you kept going. You've earned more than respect today." The officer's jaw tightened. He had tried to break him, but instead, Keanu had earned even more admiration. Just then, Tom Cruise arrived on the pier. He had heard about the officer's demand and had come to witness it himself. When he saw Keanu sitting among the sailors, his face pale with exhaustion but steady with humility, Tom's expression softened. He walked forward, helping Keanu to his feet. "You didn't need to prove anything," Tom said quietly. "Yet, you did more today than most could imagine." The officer, unable to hold his silence, snapped, "This is nonsense! Respect is not about humility. It is about discipline, about strength, about command." Tom turned, his eyes sharp. "And what? Good is command without respect? What good is strength without kindness? You are confusing fear with respect, officer. They are not the same." The sailors, listening, felt the truth strike deep. They had followed orders for years, but many realized they had followed out of fear, not respect. Keanu had shown them something different. That respect grows from humility, from kindness, from standing with others, not above them. The officer's face burned red, but before he could reply, the base commander arrived. His presence silenced the pier. He had heard the whispers of what happened the day before, and now he saw the aftermath with his own eyes. The commander's voice was calm, yet it carried weight. "Officer, enough. You forget the true meaning of service. It is not about breaking others. It is about lifting them. Humility is not weakness. Sometimes it is the greatest strength." The officer stiffened, his pride wounded, but he could not argue against the commander. He saluted sharply and turned away, his shoulders tense. Keanu, however, bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for letting me be here. I am not a soldier. I cannot understand everything you endure. But I can honor it." The commander nodded, his eyes softening. "And by enduring this morning, you have honored more than you know." As the sailors returned to their duties, many glanced at Keanu with quiet respect. They had seen something rare, a man who did not need to prove himself, yet proved more than expected. Later, as the sun began to set, Keanu walked alone near the shore. Tom joined him, his expression thoughtful. "You know," Tom said, "you could have refused. You didn't need to go through what you did." Keanu looked at the horizon. "Sometimes the only way to show humility is through action. Words can be doubted, but actions speak in silence." Tom nodded slowly. "You turned insult into respect, but I fear this is not the end. The officer will not forget this. Pride does not fall easily." Keanu's eyes remained on the waves. "Then we will meet pride again. But when we do, we will answer it the same way, through respect." The wind carried their words away, but the lesson of the day had already taken root. The sailors had seen the difference between pride and humility, and though the officer walked with anger still burning, deep inside, something in him had begun to crack. The storm was not over. It was only beginning. The crack in the armor. The harbor glowed under the pale morning light, yet the weight of yesterday still hung in the air. Sailors went about their tasks, but whispers followed every step. No one could forget how Keanu Reeves had stood through insult and challenge without anger. No one could ignore how Tom Cruise had spoken with conviction, or how the commander's words had exposed the weakness of arrogance. But one man carried those memories like a wound: the officer. He walked the corridors of the base with rigid steps, his eyes sharp, his jaw clenched. Men saluted him, but behind their eyes he saw something he hated: doubt. For years he had commanded respect through fear and authority. Now, after a single day, that power had cracked, he told himself. They are looking at me differently. They no longer fear me. They admire him. Pride burned inside him. He could not let humility of all things destroy the respect he had built. He would not allow Keanu Reeves, a man who did not belong here, to change what he had created. In the mess hall, sailors gathered, their voices quiet but steady. "He could have walked away," one whispered. "But he didn't. He stood with us. And the officer? He just kept pushing. But Keanu never broke," another said. "It makes me wonder," a third admitted. "Is respect something we give out of fear, or something we feel in our hearts?" the officer overheard. Their words struck like knives. He clenched his fists, storming out before they noticed him. That night, as shadows stretched across the harbor, the officer sat alone in his quarters. The walls around him felt tighter, the silence heavier. Pride was a cruel companion. It whispered in his ear, convincing him that the only way to restore his honor was to break the man who had humiliated him by surviving. "Tomorrow," he muttered, "I will show them all. Humility will not outshine me." The next day arrived, with drills, but the air carried unease. Sailors lined up, glancing toward the officer, sensing something was different. His commands were harsher, his voice sharper, and then his eyes found Keanu again, standing quietly at the edge, watching. The officer's lips curled. "Reeves, step forward." Keanu moved without hesitation, his calm presence contrasting the officer's intensity. "Yesterday, you played soldier," the officer said coldly. "But today, we see if your humility survives where real fear lives. You will join the night patrol. No cameras, no stage, no applause. Let us see if humility keeps you steady in the dark." Gasps moved through the sailors. The night patrol was no simple drill. It meant long hours along the coastline, the cold winds biting, and the silence of darkness pressing on every step. It was where men faced their thoughts, their fears, and sometimes their breaking point. The commander, hearing the demand, considered stepping in, but Keanu's soft nod stopped him. "I will go," Keanu said quietly. The officer's eyes gleamed with pride. So be it. The night arrived. The harbor stretched into endless black, the water reflecting faint silver from the moon. Keanu walked with a small group of sailors, their boots crunching against gravel paths, their breaths visible in the cold. The sailors glanced at him, unsure. Some worried for him, others admired his courage. One whispered, "Sir, you don't have to do this." Keanu smiled faintly. Sometimes the best way to understand others is to walk in their steps, even in the dark. Hours passed. The winds grew colder, the silence heavier. Keanu felt the weight of exhaustion from the previous day, yet he pressed on. His steps were steady, his mind focused. He thought of the officer, of the pride that drove him, and he whispered to himself, "Strength without humility is hollow." But deep within the shadows, the officer watched. He had followed quietly, unseen, determined to witness Keanu fail. He expected him to stumble, to complain, to beg for rest. Instead, he saw a man walking quietly, side by side with sailors, carrying himself with dignity, and for the first time something inside the officer cracked. He remembered his own first night patrol years ago, when he was young and uncertain. He had been afraid of the dark, afraid of failure, afraid of not being strong enough. He had hidden his fear behind pride, building walls around himself until no one could see his weakness. But now, watching Keanu, he saw a different kind of strength. Not one built on fear, but on humility. It unsettled him because deep inside, he recognized that it was stronger than his own. The sailors continued, but suddenly a cry broke the silence. One of the younger men stumbled, his ankle twisting on the uneven ground. Pain flashed across his face as he fell. The officer froze, his instinct to shout at the sailor for weakness rising. But before he could act, Keanu knelt down, placing an arm gently around the young man. "It's all right," Keanu whispered. "Lean on me." The sailor hesitated. "Sir, you'll slow down." "Then we slow down together," Keanu replied. Step by step, he helped the injured man walk. Not once did he complain. Not once did he show frustration. The other sailors fell into step, their hearts stirred by the sight. This was not command through fear. This was respect born through kindness. Hidden in the shadows, the officer felt his chest tighten. His pride fought against the truth, but he could not deny what he saw. The sailors followed Keanu not because they feared him, but because they respected him. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the patrol returned to the base. Keanu's clothes were damp with sweat, his face pale with fatigue, but his eyes calm, as ever. The injured sailor leaned against him, grateful beyond words. The commander met them at the pier. His eyes softened as he saw the scene. "You came back with more than you left with," he said. Keanu only shook his head. "I just walked beside them, that is all." But to the sailors, it was not all. It was everything. The officer, however, could not escape the storm within. In his quarters he paced, his mind torn. For years, he had believed fear built loyalty. Yet in 2 days, a man who was not even a soldier had shown that humility built something stronger. His pride refused to surrender, but deep inside, another voice began to whisper, a voice he had buried long ago. It asked him, "What if you have been wrong?" He pushed the thought away, slamming his fist against the desk. But cracks had already formed in his armor, and somewhere in the quiet of the base, sailors spoke with new conviction. "We thought fear made us strong," one said. "But now we see," another added, "strength without respect is nothing." Keanu, sitting quietly in his room, did not hear their words. He did not need to. He had never come to win admiration. He had only come to honor them. But little did he know his humility was not only breaking pride, it was awakening a storm that would test him in ways he had never faced before. The storm within, the base, woke under a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the harbor, and the air carried a strange stillness, as if the sea itself held its breath. Sailors moved through their duties with quiet focus, but beneath their calm, emotions simmered. The memory of the night patrol had spread like wildfire. They spoke of Keanu Reeves carrying an injured sailor, of his steady silence, of his refusal to abandon anyone. His actions had stirred something deeper than admiration. They had begun to question what true leadership meant. But in the officers' quarters, pride battled with doubt. He sat at his desk, his eyes locked on the dark window, his mind replaying every detail of the night. He had wanted to see Keanu break, to expose him as weak. Instead, he had witnessed a strength that frightened him, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, unshakable. He told himself, it was only luck. Humility cannot command. Respect cannot discipline. Fear is the only force men obey. But the memory of Keanu supporting the young sailor, the way others walked with him without hesitation, gnawed at the officer. Deep inside, he knew what he had seen was real. Yet pride is stubborn. It clings even when truth whispers. Later that morning, the officer stood before his men during inspection. His voice carried authority, but his eyes betrayed unease. The sailors saluted, yet he noticed their glances that drifted past him toward the barracks where Keanu stayed. He snapped commands sharper than usual, desperate to tighten his grip. But the tighter he pulled, the looser it became. He could not control what lived in their hearts. By afternoon, the tension broke when the commander called a meeting in the main hall. Sailors gathered, lining the benches, their eyes fixed on the front. Keanu sat quietly among them, his presence simple, unassuming. Tom Cruise arrived as well, standing with calm strength at the side. The commander addressed them all. In these past days, we have witnessed something unusual. Respect has been tested. Pride has clashed with humility. And each of you must decide what kind of strength you will carry forward. The officer stiffened, expecting judgment. But the commander's eyes did not condemn, at least not yet. Instead, he looked at the sailors. You have seen humility in action. Tell me, what did it show you? A young sailor rose, nervous but determined. Sir, I learned that respect is not something forced. It is something given freely when we see kindness and courage. Another stood. Sir, fear makes us obey, but respect makes us follow with our hearts. What Keanu did out there, it showed me more than orders ever did. The hall grew restless with murmurs of agreement. Keanu lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the praise. He had not come for it. He only wanted to honor them. The officer's chest burned. Each word felt like betrayal. These were his men, yet their loyalty was shifting. He rose abruptly, his voice cutting through the hall. Respect built on sympathy is weakness. Kindness does not prepare men for battle. When the enemy comes, will humility protect you? Will compassion shield you? No, it is discipline and command that keep us alive. His words echoed, but the silence afterward was heavy. The sailors did not answer. Some looked away, ashamed. Others looked at Keanu, remembering the strength he showed in the dark when no one else acted. Tom stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. Officer, you are not wrong. Discipline matters, command matters, but fear is not the only way to build it. Respect built on kindness is stronger because it lasts. Fear fades when danger rises, but true respect holds even in the storm. The hall erupted in murmurs again. The officer's hands shook with restrained anger. The commander raised a hand, silencing the room. Enough. Pride and humility both teach us lessons, but only time will reveal which is stronger. Until then, let us remember, we serve not for ourselves, but for something greater. The meeting ended, but the storm inside the officer did not. That night, the officer walked alone by the shore. The waves crashed harder than usual, as though reflecting the storm within him. He clenched his fists, speaking to the sea. I gave my life to this uniform. I built respect with iron. Now they look at me as if I am a shadow, all because of him. Anger boiled, but beneath it, a crack of fear grew. Fear that he was losing, not just authority, but the very identity he had built. He whispered, "If humility wins, then everything I have lived for is a lie." His pride could not allow that. The next day, the officer devised a test. He announced a live simulation exercise across the coastline, a drill meant to push sailors to their limits. "This will show who has true strength," he declared. "There will be no room for weakness." Keanu, though not a soldier, was quietly included. The officer made sure of it. He wanted to push him further, to find his breaking point. The drill began under the blazing sun. Sailors carried heavy packs, scaling rocky paths, crawling through sand, pushing through exhaustion. Keanu followed, his breath heavy, his body aching. Yet he did not complain. He stayed beside the sailors, sharing their burden. As the hours stretched, the officer increased the pressure. Harsher orders, longer routes, heavier loads. But instead of breaking Keanu, something unexpected happened. When a sailor stumbled, Keanu carried part of his load. When another faltered, he offered quiet encouragement. His humility did not weaken him. It strengthened those around him. The men, once broken by fear, now pushed harder, not because they were commanded, but because they wanted to stand beside him. The officer watched, his chest tightening with rage and disbelief. Every attempt to crush humility only made it grow stronger. One point, as the drill dragged into nightfall, one sailor collapsed from exhaustion. Before the officer could bark his usual command, Keanu knelt beside the man, lifting him with effort. "We don't leave anyone behind," he whispered. The sailors rallied, helping one another. For the first time in years, the drill became not a battle of fear, but an act of unity. The officer shouted, "This is weakness! This is not how soldiers survive," but his words fell empty. The men no longer looked to him. They looked to Keanu, whose silent strength guided them forward. When the drill ended, the sailors stood battered but proud. For once, there was no fear in their eyes. There was respect, not for authority, but for each other. The commander, witnessing it all, stepped forward. His voice was heavy with meaning. "Officer, look around you. You sought to break them, but instead they found strength, not in fear, not in pride, but in humility. Perhaps you should ask yourself, who truly commands respect here?" The officer's face turned pale. The truth surrounded him, undeniable, yet pride screamed within him, refusing to surrender. He turned sharply and walked away, his heart raging louder than the sea. In the quiet that followed, Tom placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "You've changed more in a few days than fear did in years. But be careful. Pride doesn't die quietly. It fights to its last breath." Keanu looked at the horizon, where the storm clouds still gathered. "Then we will face it. Not with anger, not with pride, but with humility." The sea roared in the distance as if warning that the greatest test was yet to come. When pride becomes danger. The storm finally broke over the harbor. Rain lashed against the steel decks. Lightning split the sky, and the sea churned with fury. Sailors rushed to secure equipment, their voices carried away by the howling wind. But inside the officer's mind, the real storm was far greater than anything nature could bring. He had tried to prove himself right. He had tried to break Keanu Reeves. But every attempt had backfired. Humility had grown stronger. Respect had spread through the sailors like fire. And now, the officer felt his grip slipping completely. In the dark of his quarters, he stared into the mirror. His reflection looked back at him, not as a leader, but as a man cornered by his own pride. "They look to him, not me," he whispered, bitterly. "They follow him, not my command. If I let this continue, I lose everything." The thought of losing control was unbearable. So he made a decision. Reckless. Dangerous. But in his pride, it felt like the only way. The next morning, while the storm still raged, the officer gathered the sailors in the main hall. His voice was sharp, cutting through the rumble of thunder. Today we face a real test. Not drills, not speeches, a mission. The storm has pulled a small vessel into the rocks outside the bay. We will rescue them, but this will not be easy. It will demand strength, discipline, and courage. There will be no room for weakness. The sailors exchanged uneasy glances. The sea was violent and the coastline deadly. Normally, such missions required careful planning, proper timing. But the officer was pushing them into it immediately without preparation. The commander stepped forward, concern in his eyes. "Officer, this storm is too dangerous. We should wait until the worst has passed." But the officer's pride blazed. "Sir, hesitation is weakness. The men must learn real strength. We will go now." The commander hesitated. He could feel something wrong, but the officer's authority left him bound. Reluctantly, he gave the order. Among the sailors, Keanu stood silently, his heart heavy. He had not come for missions or glory, yet he saw the fear in the men's eyes. He could not walk away. Tom Cruise stepped beside him, his jaw set. "This isn't about rescue, is it?" he whispered. Keanu's calm eyes met his. "No, it's about pride. But lives are still at risk. We cannot let them be lost." The mission began. Boats were lowered into the raging sea, their frames tossed by violent waves. Rain drenched every face, lightning lit the horizon, and the roar of the ocean swallowed commands. Keanu sat with a group of sailors, gripping the sides of the boat as it lurched. He could see fear in their eyes, yet he offered a quiet smile. "Hold steady," he said softly. "We do this together." The officer's boat led the way, his figure standing tall despite the storm. To him, this was the ultimate test. If he succeeded, he would reclaim his authority. If he pushed the men through danger, they would respect his command again. But the sea does not bend to pride. A sudden wave crashed, nearly capsizing one of the boats. Sailors cried out, struggling to keep balance. Keanu reached quickly, steadying the man beside him before he slipped into the water. "Don't let go," Keanu urged, his voice calm despite the chaos. Through the sheets of rain, the stranded vessel came into view, battered, leaning against jagged rocks. Figures clung desperately to its deck, their cries barely audible over the storm. The officer shouted, "Row harder! Faster! We take them now!" The sailors obeyed, but their fear grew. The waves slammed against the rocks with brutal force. One wrong move could destroy the rescue boats entirely. Tom's voice cut through the wind. "We need patience. If we rush, we'll lose everyone." But the officer ignored him, driving the boats closer. Keanu's heart pounded as he saw the danger. He knew pushing forward recklessly would end in disaster. He leaned toward the men in his boat. "Listen to me. We move steady, not fast. We survive by working as one, not by rushing." The sailors nodded, their trust in him outweighing their fear of the officer. Together, they rowed carefully, their rhythm slow but strong, guiding their boat safely toward the wreck. Suddenly, a scream tore through the storm. One of the officer's sailors had fallen into the raging sea. Chaos erupted. The officer barked commands, but the waves swallowed his voice. The sailor flailed helplessly, the current pulling him toward the rocks. Without hesitation, Keanu leapt into the water. The cold struck him like knives, the waves dragging him under, but he pushed forward with steady strokes. The sailors shouted, in panic, but Tom's voice held them together. "Trust him! Hold the boat steady!" Keanu fought the current, reaching the drowning man, his arms wrapped around him, pulling him up, his breath ragged but his eyes focused. "I've got you," he whispered. With the help of the sailors, he dragged the man back onto the boat. The sailor coughed violently, water spilling from his lungs, but he lived. The men stared at Keanu in awe. Soaked, exhausted, but calm, he looked at them and said, "We don't leave anyone behind." His words echoed louder than the storm. Meanwhile, the officer pushed his boat closer to the wreck, his pride blinding him. "Faster!" he roared, but the sea struck back. A massive wave lifted the boat and hurled it sideways. Sailors screamed as water poured in. The boat tilted dangerously, moments from capsizing. Tom's boat rushed to the side, his voice firm. "Pull back, you'll kill them all!" The officer's eyes burned with defiance, but fear flickered for the first time. He realized his pride had led them into danger far greater than he could control. Keanu, drenched and trembling, looked at the wreck, then at the officer's boat. His heart knew the truth. If pride continued to lead, men would die. With quiet resolve, he spoke to his sailors. "We take the lead now, steady, careful together." Guided by humility, not pride, their boat approached the wreck. One by one, they pulled the stranded passengers aboard. Frightened faces turned to relief as they found safety. Other sailors, inspired, followed Keanu's lead. Their movements slowed, their teamwork sharpened. Despite the storm, they saved lives, not through fear, but through unity. The officer, helplessly watching, felt his authority crumble. His boat had nearly been destroyed, while Keanu's calm had led them all. By the time they returned to shore, dawn had begun to break. The storm eased, the sea calming as if exhausted. The rescued passengers wept with gratitude, clinging to the sailors who had saved them. The commander stood waiting, his face grave. He looked first at the officer, then at Keanu. "Today lives were nearly lost because of reckless pride," the commander said sternly. "But they were saved because of humility. Let this be a lesson to all of us." The officer lowered his head, shame burning through him. For the first time, he had no words. The sailors surrounded Keanu, their eyes full of respect. Not the kind forced by authority, but the kind freely given. Tom placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder, his voice soft. "You showed them what leadership really is. Not power, not fear, but humility." Keanu shook his head gently. "I only did what anyone should do. No one stands alone. Not here." But deep inside, the officer's storm had not ended. His pride was wounded, but not yet destroyed, and sometimes wounded pride is the most dangerous of all. The breaking point. The storm had passed, but its shadow still lingered over the base. The sea was calmer now, waves rolling gently under the pale light of dawn, yet the hearts of the sailors carried the weight of what they had seen. Whispers spread through the corridors and along the decks, about the reckless mission, about the near disaster, and about the man who had saved them when pride almost cost their lives. They spoke of Keanu Reeves. "He jumped into the water without hesitation," one sailor said in awe. "He carried us through the storm," another whispered. "He never gave an order," a third added, "but we followed him anyway." Every word cut deeper into the officer's heart. He heard them all, he felt their meaning, and inside, his pride twisted into something darker, resentment. For years he had ruled through fear and discipline. But in only days, a man who was not even a soldier had undone it all, replacing fear with respect, replacing authority with humility. The officer stood in his quarters, staring at the wall as if it held the answer, his fists clenched, his breath ragged. "I gave my life to this uniform," he muttered. "And they choose him. They honor him. An outsider." He slammed his fist against the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. Pride, already wounded, now began to rot into desperation. That evening, the commander gathered the men in the main hall. His voice was calm, but stern. "Yesterday was a lesson we cannot forget. Pride nearly destroyed us. Humility saved us. Let this be clear. Strength is not in shouting, nor in forcing fear, but in standing together. The sailors nodded, their eyes drifting toward Keanu. The commander followed their gaze, then looked back at the officer. "Officer," he said slowly, "your actions endangered lives. You must reflect on what leadership truly means. Discipline matters, yes, but without respect, it is hollow." The officer stiffened, his jaw tightening. The hall was silent, the sailors watching. His pride screamed at him to defend himself, to fight back, but his voice failed. All he managed was a curt nod before walking out. The men whispered among themselves. Tom Cruise leaned closer to Keanu and murmured, "He won't accept this easily. Wounded pride is dangerous." "Stay ready." Keanu gave a quiet nod. "Then we answer it the same way we always have, with humility." Night fell heavy over the base. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a reminder of the storm that had passed. But inside the officers' quarters, a new storm was rising. He paced like a man trapped, his thoughts circling endlessly. Shame gnawed at him, anger boiled, and fear whispered. He remembered the look in the sailor's eyes, not fear, not obedience, but disappointment. For the first time, he questioned himself. Was I wrong all along? The question echoed, but pride smothered it quickly. No, they are blind, they are weak. They follow kindness because it is easy. But kindness cannot protect them forever. Only strength can. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder, plans for an upcoming high-risk exercise. It was scheduled for weeks later, meant only for the most prepared units. But as he looked at it, his pride whispered a dangerous idea. This will show them. This will remind them who commands respect. The next day, the officer announced the exercise. "We will move tomorrow," he declared. "An endurance march across the northern cliffs. Full packs, full gear, no shortcuts. We will prove who has the strength to endure." The sailors exchanged uneasy looks. The northern cliffs were treacherous. Steep paths, loose rocks, unpredictable winds. Even in perfect weather, it was dangerous. Doing it now, so soon after the storm, was reckless. The commander frowned. "Officer, this was not scheduled for weeks. The terrain is unstable, it is not safe." But the officer's pride flared. "Sir, safety does not train warriors. If they cannot endure this, they cannot endure battle." The commander hesitated, his eyes narrowing. But before he could refuse, Keanu stepped forward. His voice was soft, steady. "I will go." The hall fell silent. The officer's eyes widened, slightly, then narrowed again. Keanu continued, "If the men must face this, then I will face it with them." The sailors murmured, their respect for him growing deeper. The officer's jaw tightened. He had planned this to break them, but now Keanu had stepped into the fire willingly. Tom leaned close to Keanu, whispering sharply, "This is madness. He's pushing too far. He wants to break you." Keanu's calm gaze met his. "Then let him try. Sometimes the only way to end pride is to walk through it, not around it." The next morning, under gray skies, the march began. The sailors carried heavy packs, their boots grinding against sharp rocks. The cliffs rose steep, the wind howled across the edges, and the sea far below roared like a hungry beast. The officer led at the front, his posture rigid, his commands sharp. Keanu walked among the men, steady and quiet, encouraging those who faltered, sharing their burden when they stumbled. At first, the officer felt triumphant. The terrain was brutal, the packs heavy, the men struggling. Surely this would break their spirit. But as the hours passed, he saw something he did not expect. Every time a sailor stumbled, Keanu was there. Every time someone wanted to quit, his soft words lifted them. His humility became a shield, his kindness a strength. And instead of breaking, the men grew stronger. Not because of orders, not because of fear, but because they carried one another. The officer's pride began to crack further. He had given them hardship, yet they had turned it into unity. As the sun dipped low, disaster struck. One sailor, exhausted, slipped on loose rock near the edge. He cried out as he fell, his body sliding dangerously toward the cliff's drop. The officer froze, his instincts tangled between shouting commands and fear. But Keanu moved without hesitation. He dropped his pack, sprinted, and threw himself to the ground, grasping the sailor's arm just before he slid over the edge. The rocks tore at Keanu's hands, the weight pulling hard, but he held on with quiet strength. "Don't let go," Keanu whispered, his voice calm, even as his body strained. The sailors rushed, forming a chain, pulling them both back to safety. The rescued sailor collapsed, trembling, tears in his eyes. Keanu sat beside him, his hands bleeding, his breath ragged. But his eyes remained gentle. "We don't leave anyone behind." The sailors erupted in murmurs of respect. The officer watched, his chest heaving, his heart pounding. And in that moment, the truth struck him like lightning. Fear had never inspired this kind of loyalty. Authority had never built this kind of strength. All his years of pride, all his shouting and discipline had never created what one act of humility had just achieved. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar. Respect for the man he had tried to destroy. That night, as the men rested at camp, the officer sat alone by the fire. The flames flickered in his eyes, reflecting the war inside him. Pride screamed at him to hold on, to fight back. But another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered the truth. "You were wrong." He looked across the camp at Keanu, sitting quietly among the sailors, tending to the injured man's bandaged arm. There was no arrogance in him, no desire for glory, only kindness, only humility. The officer's chest tightened. Shame pressed against him, but so did something else. A longing he had buried long ago. The longing to lead not through fear, but through respect. Yet pride does not die easily. It claws, it resists, it fights until its last breath. The officer whispered to himself, "If I let go of pride, then who am I?" He had no answer. The final choice. The northern cliffs stood silent under the pale dawn. The storm had passed days, ago, yet its memory still lingered in the cracks of rock and in the hearts of the men who had walked through it. The campfires from the long march had burned down to embers, but the fire inside the officer's chest refused to fade. He sat alone, on a ridge overlooking the sea. His uniform was damp with morning dew, his eyes heavy with sleepless nights. He had spent hours asking himself the same question over and over. If I let go of pride, who am I? He had built his life on command, on fear, on the belief that strength meant control, and yet he had seen something he could no longer deny. Men following Keanu, not because they feared him, but because they trusted him. He had seen unity where once there was obedience. He had seen humility turn weakness into strength. His pride trembled, cracked, and yet clung to him like chains. Back at the base, the commander called the men together in the main hall. The sailors gathered, their faces marked with exhaustion but lit with something new, hope. Keanu stood quietly among them, simple as always, avoiding the spotlight, though everyone's eyes naturally found him. Tom Cruise stood nearby, his presence steady, watching the officer carefully. He knew the storm inside the man had not yet ended. The commander's voice rose over the silence. "These past days have tested us all. We faced storms, danger, and our own pride. And what saved us was not anger, not fear, but humility. But this test is not over. The question remains, What kind of strength will lead us forward? He looked at the officer, his eyes heavy with meaning. The time has come for you to answer that. The hall turned silent. Every sailor's eyes shifted to the officer. He stood slowly, his posture rigid, his face pale. The weight of years pressed on his shoulders, but the weight of truth pressed heavier. His voice, when it came, trembled. I built my life on fear. I believed command was control, that respect was obedience. I thought humility was weakness. But I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the hall. The sailors leaned closer. The officer's eyes dropped to the floor, shame flooding him. In my pride, I endangered you. I nearly cost lives. And yet humility saved what pride could not. Humility stood where my strength fell. He lifted his gaze, and for the first time his eyes carried something different, not pride, but honesty. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only ask to learn, because I see now, the greatest strength is not in fear. It is in respect freely given. It is in humility. The hall was silent, the weight of his words sinking deep. Then slowly the sailors began to nod, not in obedience, but in understanding. Tom stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. The hardest battle is not against storms or enemies. It is against ourselves. Today, you fought that battle. And in speaking these words, you have won more than you lost. The officer's chest tightened. He felt tears sting his eyes, tears he had buried for years behind walls of pride. He bowed his head. Reeves, he said quietly, his voice breaking. You came here a stranger. I insulted you. I tried to break you. But instead, you showed me the strength I never had. You showed me that humility is not weakness. It is the greatest act of courage. For that, I thank you. Keanu's calm voice carried through the hall, gentle, yet powerful. You were never my enemy. Pride was, and pride lives in all of us. But humility can live there too, if we let it. The sailors rose to their feet, not with cheers, not with applause, but with a silence so deep it felt sacred. It was the silence of respect, freely given. From that day, the base changed. Drills were still hard, discipline still firm, but something had shifted. Sailors helped one another more. They carried their burdens together. Respect was no longer forced. It was lived. The officer, now humbled, walked among them not as a figure of fear, but as a man learning alongside them. His commands softened, his heart opened, and slowly the sailors began to respect him again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Tom often stood beside him, guiding quietly. Keanu, though, remained the same, humble, quiet, always in the background, when men praised him. He simply shook his head. I am not the hero, he said softly. You are. I only reminded you of what you already carried inside. Weeks later, as the sun set over the calm harbor, the officer found Keanu sitting alone on the pier, his eyes on the horizon. He walked forward, standing beside him. I used to think humility made men small, the officer admitted, but I see now it makes them great. Keanu smiled faintly. Humility doesn't make us less. It makes us real. And when we are real, we can stand stronger together. The officer nodded, his eyes wet again. I lost everything to pride, but because of you, I found myself again. Thank you. Keanu turned to him, his voice quiet. Don't thank me. Thank the men who chose respect over fear. Thank yourself for finding the courage to change. The sea shimmered in the fading light, waves gentle against the shore. The officer felt peace for the first time in years. The sailors would never forget those days, the storm, the rescue, the march, and the lessons that followed. They would speak of Keanu Reeves, the man who came not to command but to listen. not to demand, but to respect. They would remember Tom Cruise, who stood as a steady voice of reason, and they would remember the officer, who faced his greatest battle and found the strength to lay down his pride. In the end, it was not about a movie star, a commander, or even a storm. It was about the truth that humility is stronger than pride, and kindness can endure where fear cannot. The harbor returned to calm, but the men who served there walked with new strength in their hearts, because they had learned that the greatest act of courage is not to command others, but to humble oneself.